Hey guys, it's Julie B. Deep Dives again, and today I'm deep diving into Season 3, Episode 1 of From. The wait is finally over, and as I expected, From Season 3 has started off with a gigantic bang. The first episode is called Shatter, which has a double meaning. In a literal sense, of course, it's a reference to the shattered glass of the window through which Tabitha was pushed into the real world. But more interesting to me is the metaphorical shattering of the town, from the food running out to the ambush at the end, with the tragic demise of Tian Shen, and culminating in the shattering of Boyd's spirit that this is sure to cause. Shatter is another term for break, after all, and this is exactly what the monsters and this place are trying to do to Boyd. Let's start with where Season 2 left off, the cliffhanger that electrified the fandom. Tabitha's dramatic and unexpected escape from Fromville. Many fans believed she is in Camden, Maine, after Google image searching the view out her hospital window. As I explained in my video, The Flight of Tabitha, I was more sure of this than most, because I recognized this view from my hikes just outside of Camden, including this shot that I took in 2017. I also believed it was most likely to be Camden because the trailer showed us an ambulance from Knox County will arrive in Fromville this season, and Camden resides in Knox County, Maine. This was too uncanny to be a coincidence. Sure enough, a doctor informs Tabitha that she is, in fact, in Camden, Maine. I predicted that the police would want to question her, and the doctor said they are on the way, just a formality. But Tabitha didn't want to wait around to find out, likely aware that she would be under suspicion for the disappearance of her family, with no logical explanation to provide. Based on the second trailer, showing Tabitha here peeking out of her hospital room, I stated in my last video that she would sneak out of the hospital, and so she did. The room number on the door is 2225, which is interesting because 2 and 2 equal 4, and 2 and 5 equal 7. Yet another recurrence of the 4s and 7s on this show. Outside the hospital, we can see a cop arriving to the scene, and on her arm is a patch with a little boat on it, which matches the patch that we'll later see on the new cop Acosta's arm when she arrives in town, as we saw in the trailer. Last week, I predicted that the boy in white would appear to Tabitha in the real world. I was excited to see my theory come true, as the second trailer already showed us that the boy in white would appear to Tabitha on the street. She looks down the street and sees the boy in white standing among a crowd of people waving at her creepily. It felt very much like a scene out of Stephen King's It, which is fitting because Tabitha is in Maine. She pursues him, and we clearly see him enter a shop. We also see her approach him from behind, still dressed in the boy in white's outfit. But when she turns him around, it's a different boy entirely. She says, "What did you mean this is the only way?" Now the question is, was all of this in Tabitha's imagination? I don't think so. The writers may want us to question whether Tabitha is just losing her mind or hallucinating, but I believe the boy in white can manifest or project his image into the real world or our dimension. I believe he projected himself to Tabitha, a kind of illusion in front of her eyes, but still with a very real presence. The boy in white, in my opinion, represents a spiritual entity, and his visible form is just an avatar, which can project itself into the real world, into people's dreams, into people's heads, in the form of voices and visions, etc. Although he may seem corporeal at times, like when he got wet in the rain in Season 1, or when he pushed Tabitha out of the lighthouse, these are only illusions. An illusion could make itself appear wet, and if this illusion represents a spiritual entity that has power, it could push someone too. Think of it like a ghost that makes objects move around or makes a table levitate at a seance. It doesn't mean this entity has physical form, but it can actually enact change on its environment. I believe the boy in white represents a spirit that is trapped in Fromville, but it can project itself outside of it like a hologram. I have theorized that the boy in white was actually the source of the voice that spoke to Father Cautry when he was about to jump off a bridge. It told him to get back in the car and drive, and 2 hours later he was in Fromville. Again, I also believe the boy in white lured Mr. Liu out of his home by mimicking the voices of his brothers, which led Kenny and Tian Shen to go out looking for him and ultimately end up in Fromville. And then there was Elgin, who had a dream on the way into Fromville in which the boy in white recited the cicada nursery rhyme, a premonition dream that caused him to recognize Fromville and panic when he arrived. Now, Tabitha seeing the boy in white in the real world doesn't definitively prove these theories, but it does lend credence to them, and it's truly a game changer. Continuing with Tabitha's storyline, she asks a stranger to use her phone to call her mom and tells her mom she's all right. This scene serves as evidence that Tabitha is in the real world, not a level 2 of Fromville, and not the past, because she borrows a modern smartphone. After this, Tabitha finds a church and visits a priest and enters a confessional because she's afraid to tell anyone else her insane story. She says, "I feel like my mind is breaking." And this is exactly what Fromville does to the psyche, even after escape. This line seems designed to make us question whether she really saw the boy in white or if it was all in her mind. But again, I believe he really did project himself there. Speaking to the priest again, she brings up her deceased baby Thomas and blames God for losing him. She says this is a mistake and starts to leave, but he follows her out of the confessional to stop her. He asks her, what was his name? She tells him Thomas. The question is, though, how did he know her baby was a boy? Could it be anything like the series Lost? There were a group of people called the Others who knew everything about everyone, things they shouldn't know. Just a thought. Tabitha flat out tells him that she came from a town full of monsters that come out at night and no one can leave, and her family is trapped there. He looks oddly nonchalant about it, not really surprised, with an odd expression on his face. He asks her what snacks Victor packed in his lunchbox for her and is pushy about getting her to open it, saying, "Humor me." When she takes some things out of it, she sees an address under the name Victor Kavanaugh. Could the priest have recognized the lunchbox? Why did he seem to know there would be an address inside? Something to think about. Now, another prediction from my video on Tabitha came true here. The house of Victor's father, Henry, is within easy walking distance of the hospital and the church. She walks there without any need for transportation. This can't be a coincidence, as I've said before. The boy in white clearly pushed her out specifically to this location within walking distance of Victor's father's house, in my opinion, on purpose, and it had to be to find Henry, Eloise, or both, and possibly some artifact from Henry's basement. I mean, what would be the odds that she would land within walking distance of Henry when her family had been traveling in Arizona, not Maine? So I believe that the lighthouse is a portal that can take a person wherever the boy in white wants to send them. And I believe the faraway trees work the same way. They aren't random like Victor thinks they are, in my opinion. When Tabitha arrives at Henry's house, he says, "Oh, for Christ's sake, I'm not in the mood," which makes me question, now who did he expect her to be? Perhaps there has been media attention on him because his daughter Eloise probably escaped Fromville, and maybe she had a psychotic break. I believe that she's most likely institutionalized. Then he notices the lunchbox in her hands and recognizes it. He asks her where she got it from, and she realizes he's Victor's father. Back in Fromville, Boyd is putting out metaphorical fires all over town today. First, he has another awesome scene with Ghost Cautry, who's back for more snarky banter. Cautry gives us a bit of exposition to remind us of the situation in town as we last left it. Boyd's treating his own gunshot wound. Half the town is still afraid to go to sleep. There's a food shortage with no solution, and it's getting pretty cold outside. Boyd said they have blankets, and Khatri makes a snarky remark about how that will be enough. He says, "Maybe you're not panicked enough." I don't believe that this is just Boyd talking to himself, by the way. I believe this is a manifestation of an evil spirit, and the same goes for Ghost Abby and Ghost Tom. Khatri is more subtle, whereas Abby is overtly sinister. But Boyd is starting to catch on to Ghost Khatri now. He says that thing that was telling me to give up, that hope is what the forest fed on, that thing, whatever it was, it sure as hell wasn't my wife. So what are you? Khatri says, "I'm afraid I can't answer that for you, Boyd." Which is interesting. Something to keep in the back of your mind about what really is the nature of this Khatri entity. Boyd goes outside when he hears Ethan yelling. He tried to run off to look for his mom, and Mrs. Lou finds him and brings him back. Jim and Julie had been searching for him too. When Boyd and Kenny see an unknown object fly out the window of the bar and break the glass, they enter the bar to find Jade laying on the floor, looking up at a massive web of threads that he's strung up all over the bar, as if trying to recreate the blood symbol and try to understand the message that his vision in the cave was trying to send at the end of season 2. He's holding the book full of symbols and saying, "They tried to show me, tried to show me." He's been drinking, so they take him to the sheriff's station for the night. In a moment of foreshadowing, Ethan is sitting at the table in front of Mr. Liu's memorial, which is just like the one that Tian Chen will have in her funeral, based on the images we saw in the trailer. Ethan is also doing a puzzle that looks like it could be Camden, Maine, which is an interesting little Easter egg, kind of like a Lost connection from the series Lost, because this is where his mom is in the real world. Boyd's next task is trying to convince Jim not to go into the woods to look for Tabitha, because he had barely made it out of the forest alive himself. He says his tent was dragged God knows where by God knows what. Now this was so refreshing to hear. Someone actually talking about one of the biggest questions that the fans have had, how the tent was dragged in season 1. Boyd also tells them to look for a large amount of spider webs and says that you can't miss them. This is another unexplained thing that was never discussed again. So once again, it was so refreshing as a fan to hear it mentioned. It signals that maybe answers to some of these old mysteries are still coming. Jim is insistent on going, so Boyd advises Jim to camp out in the stone talisman hut, and Kenny insists on going with Jim. Boyd tries to talk Kenny out of going, but he says, "We can't play defense forever, Boyd." And now we have an eerie bit of foreshadowing and irony. Kenny says, "I know what it's like to lose a parent here, and I'm not just going to sit here and watch Julie and Ethan lose both of their parents in a single week." Little does Kenny know that he's about to lose his second parent by the end of this episode. I have a theory about events and visions being manifested by things people say, do, feel, or are afraid of. So I have to wonder if Tian Chen's death could have even been somehow manifested by what Kenny said. Just food for thought. Before Kenny and Jim head out, Tian Chen tells Kenny, "I wish you'd stay. I can't lose you too." Ironically, Kenny is the one who's going to lose her, and he'll carry some guilt for leaving, I'm sure, when she had asked him not to go. Later, Boyd finds Randall trying to take Ethan's favorite goat, Alma, to kill her for food, and Victor defends Ethan, taking out his gun and pointing it at Randall. Boyd gets him to hand it over, and he manages to get the goat back and make a stirring speech in the process. He explains that they need the animals for milk and eggs, and he tells everyone, "We're still in this thing. We can still win. This place will not break us. The only way we go home is together. This connects back to the running theme of games with the phrase, we can still win. Also, it underscores the fact that this place is not only trying to break Boyd, it's trying to break everyone in town. It's targeting Boyd the most because everyone relies on him the most. And the more Boyd's leadership skills can be compromised, the more the town will suffer by extension. The entity in control of this place thrives on dragging out people's suffering and pain. It's why the creatures walk and never run. Here we have Donna telling Boyd that they lost half of their crop to the storm, and they need to get what they have left out of the ground before it freezes. But they find that it's all rotten when they pull it out of the ground. She shows Boyd, who then goes to Mrs. Lou's house and finds that all of their remaining rations are gone after a mob of townspeople took them. They decide that they have no choice but to start slaughtering the livestock, which upsets Ethan. Boyd reassures him, and Ethan asks if Alma the goat can go first, so she doesn't have to watch her friends die. This is exactly what happened to Victor as a child. He was left as the sole survivor of a massacre and had to watch everyone pass away. And it's what I believe is supposed to happen to Ethan if the townspeople don't find a way to break this cycle. Meanwhile, at Colony House, Elgin is still afraid to go to sleep. He starts to nod off, and then we see him crocheting with Tilly, as she says, "This place isn't half bad once you have the right hobby." Once again, Tilly is suspect here. She's way too relaxed and content in this horrific place. Just like in Season 2. She tells him that Boyd said it's safe to go to sleep now and he should rest. Elgin says, "No, it's not that. I feel like something is watching me. But then I wake and I can remember." Immediately after he says this, the ghoul who appeared to him in his Season 2 bathtub dream appears and comes toward him, wearing a kimono and looking a bit different than the one from Season 2, but it's definitely supposed to be the same entity, looking like a dried-up husk of a person. This was the ghoul from Season 2, who looked more like a dead Fatima. Once again, Tilly is far too relaxed. She says, "Is that her? She looks scary." The ghoul reaches out her hands, which appear to have sand slowly falling from them, and puts them onto Elgin's face. He apparently wakes up, and Tilly isn't there. Once again, this is suspect. Elgin had another dream that could be a premonition, and now Tilly was in it. It makes me wonder about the true nature of Tilly, and if she's really suspect, or if she's just a nosy old grandma. It's clear now that this is not a future version of a dead Fatima, as many people had theorized. The show put out a casting call for this creature that asked for a woman of Asian descent, and Fatima is Iranian. The question is then, who or what is this ghoul, and what does she want? There is no evidence yet to point to an answer. From the little we've seen so far, I think she could be connected to the Lake of Tears from Ethan's story. She first appeared to Elgin in a dream in which he was taking a bath and she tried to push him under the water. He's felt uneasiness about water since he arrived in town and asked if there's a body of water there. Fatima had shown him the Brundles in Season 2, but I think it may be this new lake that he saw in a premonition dream he had on the bus. This image was released by Amazon as part of Episode 1, but it must have been an error. Kenny and Jim will most likely find this in Episode 2 on their way back to town. The ghoul appears damp and her skin is extremely shriveled, as if dehydrated from being in water for an extended period. It's possible that she was a past victim of Fromville who drowned in the lake. Robert Saunders from the Discord that I'm in has an interesting theory that this ghoul could be one of the fairies from Ethan's story about magical fairies coming from the Lake of Tears to heal Norman. The way the ghoul places her hands on Elgin's face doesn't actually seem threatening, even though he's terrified. It appears as if she could be trying to heal him in some way, or send us a clue as the audience that she has healing power. Moving on, at Colony House, Fatima has been throwing up, suffering stomach pain, and already looking pale. The episode descriptions for this season have told us serious trouble is coming related to her pregnancy. Now, in one of the most interesting scenes from this episode, Jem and Kenny find the creepy scarecrow totems, including this memorable one missing an eye, which fits in with the recurring theme of one-eye symbolism in the show. As I said in my previous video, I believe these totems may warn of evil or ward off evil, and possibly both. The two enter the village of old cabins, and we can see there appear to be a total of 7 totems. Yet another instance of the number 7 popping up in this show. They decide to look around to make sure it's safe before they camp out inside of a cabin for the night. The ceiling is so low in the one that they're camping in that they can't even stand up inside of it. Once inside for the night, Jim realizes that he's made a mistake leaving town and risking his life when his kids are already missing their mother. They plan to go back when the sun comes up, and also get to higher ground to try to get a lay of the land. And then there are rustling sounds and footsteps outside. It's unclear what could be making these sounds. It doesn't sound like an animal. Could it be a monster this far out? Or a lone person actually living in this village, like the character Danielle Rousseau, who lived alone on the island of Lost? So to my fellow Lost fans, if you know, you know. Back at the sheriff's station, Jade wakes up from his drunken state and says he isn't ready to share with Boyd what's going on with him right now, that he's still trying to work it out. So he still, unfortunately, hasn't shared what happened to him in the cave and the vision that he had in season 2. He looks more disheveled than ever before, with his hair and beard a wild, untamed mess, still reflecting his deteriorating mental state and his spiral into madness. Now we have the exciting final sequence of the show. In a genius ambush, the monsters let the animals loose to draw people outside, knowing that they're relying on these animals as their last remaining food source. Boyd sees the livestock outside and runs out to try to bring them back to the barn with Jade. The monsters come out of the shadows and start to close in, while Randall blares the bus horn and turns on the headlights to warn them. Meanwhile, Ethan looks out the window and sees his favorite goat, Alma, and then foolishly opens the door and sees Granny Monster, who forces her way in as Ethan and Julie run for the back door. She transforms into her monster form, which is an awesome visual, until she's in her natural bald state and actually screeches on camera, something we've never seen from the creatures do on camera. We've never seen the creatures do on camera before. Sarah is outside waiting, which I'm guessing is because she heard some commotion, so she came out to help. And this is part of her redemption arc. She guides Julie and Ethan into a bush, and then Randall sees them and calls for them to come into the bus with him. Randall also blares the bus horn to warn people the creatures are coming. He tends to be a great person to have around in a dire crisis, and he volunteers to help in these situations, so he does have redeeming qualities. Here we have the milkman who approaches Jade and kills a cow in front of him as Jade stares in shock. Victor somehow manages to be brave in moments like this. It's as if he's not afraid of the monsters, but he knows he has to protect others from them. Here he is saving Jade, who is frozen in place. I believe Victor has been under the protection of the boy in white all these years, which would explain how he survived for many, many years according to John Griffin, who said that he did. Victor pulls Jade to safety. And like Granny Monster, the milkman transforms into his natural state and screeches on camera, ultimately losing his hat and being purely in this bald state. Tien Shen refuses to go back without helping Boyd get the cow into the barn. And as they make their way in there and close the door behind them, a group of monsters come out of hiding, waiting to ambush them. Here's where the cowboy monster utters the line that we all know so well from the teaser. "You said this place couldn't break you. That's what you said." Let's see. Boyd tries to fight them off as hard as he can, but the professor creature transforms and scratches him. They restrain Boyd and tie him to a post. The cowboy monster makes it clear that his words, "You don't break me," that Boyd said at the end of season 2, led to them taking this action as a challenge. Boyd tries to offer up his life, of course, instead, but the cowboy monster says that that wouldn't be any fun for them. As I've said before, they're playing the long game of psychological torture with Boyd, trying to slowly break his spirit, and by extension, to slowly break the entire town of people who rely on his leadership to survive. While Boyd watches helplessly, the monsters torture Tien Shen until her demise, slowly skinning her alive most likely, as we see from a brief glimpse of a monster ripping off a piece of her scalp. As I predicted, very little was actually shown of this murder. Instead, the camera focused on Boyd's face and emotional reaction, which is highly effective and fires the imagination regarding what horrors to which the monsters might be subjecting Tien Shen. Now, just to give you a little review, some things that I wasn't that excited about or what I didn't like as much. When I first saw the Amazon photos from episode 1, I was concerned that they were trying to jam too much into one episode. My concerns were validated in some cases. For the past 2 seasons, the first episode spans just a single day or a single night as the premiere, and the second episode is the subsequent night or day, as the case may be. This format was still action-packed, and it didn't feel rushed in seasons 1 and 2. It had the space to breathe and build maximum tension. I felt that the episode starting season 3 here, it rushed through some scenes that could have been more intriguing. It actually felt like there were some missing scenes. Like, for example, normally they would flesh out certain scenes more. This causes the episode to lose some of the suspense it could have generated. For instance, they didn't show us the tension of the Matthews family not knowing where Ethan is. We just see him being brought back by Tien Shen. Jim and Julie were looking all over for him, so it was a missed opportunity for some drama, in my opinion. Later, the same issue came up with Jim and Kenny at the village of cabins. When Kenny suggested that they search the village before they camped out in a cabin, the scene cut right there, and it lost an opportunity to build tension and intrigue as they searched the village. Fans had such anticipation for what could be in this old village after seeing the trailer, so it felt a bit anticlimactic not to show them exploring it, and later to cut to them camping out inside one. Hopefully they'll show more of this in episode 2. In addition, I personally did not care for the torture of Tien Shen, even though most of it was not shown on camera. It's just my personal preference that I just dislike torture in series and film. However, I will admit that the scene is extremely effective and reestablishes the horror roots with which the show first began. Season 2 was a significant departure from the shocking horror of Season 1, in which a little girl was murdered and her grisly body placed on display in the very first episode. There was also a dramatic massacre and a major death in Season 1, Father Cautry. Whereas Season 1 was steeped in horror, Season 2 took a more esoteric route with the music box, the ballerina visions, and the cicada entity. There were no major deaths other than Smiley, who is technically not a character, just a creature, albeit their scariest and most memorable creature. Season 3 seems to be bent on remedying the decrease in horror that occurred in Season 2, course-correcting right out of the gate. Showrunner Jeff Pinkner has said that a few beloved characters won't make it out alive. That's a direct quote. And I hope that this means that they're overestimating how much people care about some of the bus people from Season 2. Because personally, I'm only really attached to the Season 1 characters, and I would hate for the show to turn this into a bloodbath just to make up for the lack of bloodletting in Season 2. Now, some things that I loved about this episode. Tabitha's scenes in the real world were phenomenal and riveting to watch. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen as I scanned every frame to see if there were clues to what's happened to her. The reveal of the boy in white on the street was mind-blowing. Her scenes with the priest were intriguing, and her scene with Henry was gripping as well, with her realization that he is Victor's father. Nothing about Tabitha's scenes felt rushed at all. I also love the new portrayal of the creatures. We had never before seen them walk around in their true form, with the hideous alien-like faces and bald heads on display. In the past, we only saw them transform for the few seconds before they murdered someone, and also during the Smiley autopsy. The transformation of Granny Monster was epic. The way that the creatures turned into their true form when they attacked, and the way they threw back their heads and screeched was awesome. We never saw them screech before on camera either. They had always stopped after Boyd found the talismans, but when the new cycle began in Season 1, they started screeching again. It's just that we never saw them do it. In addition, I love that the show seems to be setting up some possible answers, or at least signaling that the still lingering questions from Season 1 will eventually be answered. For instance, who moved the tent? Why were there so many spider webs in the woods? And who or what was the bathtub kimono ghoul in Season 2? So, for biggest takeaways from this episode, I would say it's abundantly clear how much this town relies on Boyd and his leadership, including Colony House. There is no divide between Colony House and town anymore. Boyd was practically everywhere all at once, reassuring people, dealing with crises, strategizing, not even having time to take care of his own needs, including a fresh buckshot wound on his upper arm, which he wrapped up himself. By the end, the monsters commit such an act of brutal atrocity that I predict Boyd will struggle immensely with trying to lead the town now. He will carry guilt for not protecting Tian Shen and not getting her inside to safety. Also for baiting the monsters at the end of Season 2 by screaming that this place will not break him. A statement that they threw in his face right before they tortured Tian Shen right in front of him until her demise. This will haunt Boyd for the rest of his life, and while he may bend and come close to his breaking point, I believe he will not break. His spirit is too indomitable to break. Now, I want to know what you think. How did you feel about this episode? What were your favorite scenes? What do you think this ghoulish thing was in Elgin's vision? How do you think the monster's attempt to break Boyd will affect him? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and any other ideas that you might have. And please leave a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Until next time, keep on deep diving, and let's see what we can uncover together.